Hello and welcome to Kickin' Healthy Relationships to the Curb. I am your host, Stephanie McPhail. Steve, my co-host, is finding a place to get internet, but he will be coming on and hanging out with us. We are super excited to have an author coming on today, a fellow author. And I think, we got to meet I guess it's been a few months ago, and we just started talking and I said, okay, you have to come on the show. And she's very passionate, very knowledgeable about so many different things. And I think you're really going to get her excitement and interest in helping other people when you listen to this interview. So I'm not going to waste too much time. If we can get Ivana Lucas on, welcome Ivana Lucas to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And you and I have done another show together, and you are so incredibly passionate about what you do, and you really know your subject matter. Because in part of that show, we had this role play, and you had to pretend to be like almost one of your clients, and you knew what they were going through. You could understand it, and you could talk to anybody about it. So I know the passion and the knowledge that you have.
Well, I so appreciate that. And that was so fun. It was such a different experience to come on your show. And now we were joking around before, like now we get to trade off and now you get to come to my realm and we can share some of all the great stuff that you do and people can see all of the, again, you're so knowledgeable. You have so much different information in there. So tell us a little bit about you.
Oh gosh. So I write books. I'm a physician and I've been practicing family medicine for, almost 2 decades. And I take care of patients that kind of talk to me about everything because not everybody goes to a psychologist, not everybody goes to a psychiatrist, and sometimes as a family physician, you get to see the whole family and you get to see some of the, over time, you get to see some of the interactions that the different family members have with each other. And then you start to have some of those conversations about relationships. And where are your relationships? And what's going on with your relationships? And how can I help? And I like to look at things from the perspective of a physician. And as a physician, we talk about medications, we talk about hormones, we talk about human physiology and how some of your human physiology is responsible for some of your behavior. Mm-hmm. So an example of that is, let's say that I have, and we're going to talk about toxic relationships and the things that's important to you, but a lot of our relationship type of behavior is kind of influenced by our hormones. And those hormones include dopamine, vasopressin, and oxytocin. And depending upon the levels of those hormones that we have in our bodies, we might act differently when we're in a relationship with somebody. Mm. So an example is that, let's say that you have someone who's very, who has a lot of dopamine in their system, and it's a very dopamine system, and the brain works and feeds off of dopamine. And less so of the vasopressin and the oxytocin, because that happens in certain attachment styles, for instance, and I'll gladly go into attachment styles. People who are potentially more avoidantly attached tend to sometimes be more driven by the dopamine than by the other hormones. And a dopamine is very much pleasure seeking. So it looks for novelty, it looks for excitement, it looks for things that are different in you. And it gets a lot of its highs and its motivations towards doing new things. So dopamine, that excitement and the dopamine levels go down if we're not experiencing novelty. Mm-hmm. And if you're someone who feels like they constantly need to be in a state of novelty and newness, and you have less of the vasopressin and the oxytocin in your system, then some of the behavior that we might expect in a relationship, lots of protectiveness, trustworthiness, being there for the other person, feeling emotionally connected, they might not appear as much in that relationship because oxytocin is a hormone that makes us feel calm. It makes us feel secure in a relationship. If we're not experiencing as much of it, or we're not craving the oxytocin as much, we're not going to behave in ways that bring it on. So we might not give the other person as much hugs, as much cuddles. We might not try to establish as much emotional connection. And if we're
I want to jump in really quick because I think only because this is so interesting to me, especially, I mean, from the physician's perspective as opposed to, on the other side. So there's that difference. But, it's one of the things I try to tell my clients where they have become so used to the stress and overwhelm of the relationship because love, I always say, like, for me, love was uncomfortable. So therefore I sought out uncomfortable and was like, oh, it's love. This is what I'm looking for. And then that's what I wanted to be around, even though it felt terrible. It's what I knew and felt comfortable with. One of the things that are the complaints, and I think this is going along with what you were saying. One of the complaints is that, well, the nice guy, the nice partner, the easy partner isn't so fun. They're boring. And so the fear is, well, if I end up with a nice guy, if I end up with a nice partner, well, then life is going to be boring. So I subconsciously am searching out these people that are really toxic because it gives me that energy that I'm looking for. Can you explain that a little bit from the chemical perspective?
Oh, gladly. Thank you. So dopamine causes us to want to be in exciting relationships. We get those highs. We're doing exciting things. There's this novelty with it. There's this like excitement and fun. And dopamine is transient. It doesn't last forever. Eventually, like let's say you have a beautiful view of the Manhattan skyline. It's absolutely gorgeous and you just love it and gives you like this sense of energy when you're looking at the Manhattan skyline. Well, after looking at it for 5 years, you're not going to be as excited about it. Mm-hmm. And it's similar with dopamine. Those highs that you have in dopamine eventually go away. That you can only do something novel or new, exciting so much before you don't anymore. And relationships go through phases. So that dopamine high that's so common at the beginning of any relationship tends to decrease as we transition in the type of love we have towards somebody. So dopamine high starts to go down, and then it's supposed to be replaced by more of the vasopressin and oxytocin, which gives us that bonding, that sense of protectiveness towards somebody, that warmth and fuzzies and security. Mm-hmm. And we might not be used to just feeling that. That might feel boring for us. And it kind of doesn't feel the same as newness and excitement. Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes the people who are best at giving us those dopamine highs, who are best at giving us the newness and the excitement and doing all those things at the beginning of a relationship, which make us feel wonderful, tend to not be also driven a lot by dopamine and less by the vasopressin and less by the oxytocin. And so as their high of the dopamine decreases, they're probably looking for the next hit too, and not necessarily looking to establish those long-term bonds with you, looking to establish a feeling of security within you and the emotional connectiveness.
Yeah, I feel like, that would make sense in that, where all of a sudden it's like people are fighting more and they're, just there's more. And I hate to say this because I remember getting so annoyed when somebody said to me, you like drama. That's why you stay in that relationship. And I was so offended because I consciously didn't like it. I was just so stuck in this cycle of, I got to fix it. I got to figure it out. It's like you're clawing your way out. And as much as I didn't want it, it's what I was used to. So I was used, and I could feel it all over my body. I could feel the fear, the feeling in my chest, the discomfort, all of those terrible things. And as much as they felt really bad, it's what I was used to. So I was looking out for those things and seeking those things out, as opposed to being like, no, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want this, and walking away from it, because walking away, it's like, I always say we're addicted to these relationships. And it sounds like that makes sense from the hormonal perspective. If we're addicted to the relationship, then when that person goes away from us and we're not getting that hit that we're used to getting of that excitement, as much as the excitement's terrible, we're not getting it. We feel depleted. We feel terrible because we're not getting that hit of, I guess, the dopamine.
And that part of it also is when you're under stress, because the relationship itself is stressful, your dopamine levels can still get high. Even with stress, you can still have high dopamine levels.
Mhm.
But it's harder to get higher levels of oxytocin and vasopressin.
Mhm.
So when you're under stress, your oxytocin levels and your vasopressin levels tend to be lower to begin with. So somebody who's under stress is not necessarily going to feel as protective towards the person they care about. They're not going to necessarily have that calmness and the security in that relationship, even if the relationship is wonderful, just because in other ways, just because they're under stress, so they're not able to feel those hormones as much. And so if you aren't able, if the stress itself, the cortisol, is causing you to have lower levels of other hormones in the relationship that make you feel really good about the relationship, then what you're going to be gravitating towards, because it's the only thing that you're feeling within that relationship that you're really experiencing, would be those dopamine highs. So you'll want to go for your next dopamine high, because the other parts that are supposed to make you feel safe and secure, it's even harder for you to feel them.
Mm. So that sounds like that would go into some of the attachment styles.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what are the, I always, when people talk about attachment styles, for me, I feel like it's something to work through. What would you, from a clinician side, what would you say, why is it that we get stuck in these different types of attachment styles?
Right. So we're talking about like Goldilocks, and ideally, in a secure, healthy, long-term relationship, we do go through a dopamine phase. Everything's new and exciting. And then the dopamine level drops and it's replaced by higher levels of making you feel safe and secure, the oxytocin, as well as the vasopressin, which kind of gives you that feeling of like protectiveness and care. And what you're supposed to be able to experience the appropriate amounts of them at different stages of a relationship. If you're securely attached, you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you're somebody who is avoidantly attached, who has that avoidant attachment styles, then even when you were little, in your younger years, you experienced those dopamine highs and lows, but you didn't have as much of an opportunity to get increased levels of oxytocin and increased levels of vasopressin in your body. So you're not used to it. You operate someone who is avoidant, who goes into relationships really excitedly at the beginning, gets really like becomes on strong, but then as the newness fades, stops leaning as much into the relationship. It's because you're not getting that dopamine high from it, and you don't have the oxytocin and vasopressin to the high enough levels to be able to like move you to the next stage where the relationship still feels wonderful, but just in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
If you are anxiously attached, when you're anxiously attached, the anxious attachment style can reduce your vasopressin activity a little bit, and it can also reduce your oxytocin activity a little bit, but not to the same level as someone who's avoidant. And so in that situation, you still wind up craving a little bit more of that dopamine, because it's like if you have a Goldilocks levels where you want just the right amount of each hormone, depending upon where you're in the relationship, it's harder to achieve that with the other types. So one of the things that happens to people who are avoidantly attached is you wind up not necessarily feeling as secure in the relationship. Sometimes your serotonin levels continue to be low when you're anxiously attached. Which serotonin, is supposed to be low at the beginning of a relationship when you're obsessing about somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Low serotonin levels can cause obsession about someone. But then eventually the serotonin levels are supposed to go right back up as the obsession starts to fade. And when you are anxiously attached, the serotonin levels may continue to be a little bit low. So you might obsess a little bit more about the relationship.
So how does someone work through that? I mean, obviously, coaching and therapy and that kind of stuff. Is there a need for medications to help with regulating that? I guess is the first question. And then, I'm going to hold off on the second question. So is there a need for medication to kind of fix that? Or is it more the talk therapy and coaching type of stuff to help through that?
Right. So really good question. Depends. If you are someone who is anxiously attached, or if you're somebody who winds up obsessing about someone in a relationship, like they might not be the best person for you. They might not treat you like you need to be. They might not follow through on their commitments or do what they're supposed to, or they really respect you. But you continue to be in that relationship. Sometimes your serotonin levels are a little bit low and you wind up obsessing about them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes taking a medication like an SSRI, which is an antidepressant, can stop the obsession. It can blunt a lot of other emotions, but it can stop some of that obsessive thinking that you have about somebody else to help you think a little bit more clearly about the situation. But there's different ways to get high levels of serotonin. You don't necessarily have to get it from medications. You can get it through foods that contain a lot of amino acids. You can get some of it through exercise.
Excellent. So, I think one of the things that's really standing out for me is I wish that more physicians had these conversations with clients or patients. I'm used to saying clients with patients because if you go in and you're saying, hey, I'm stressed and overwhelmed, and it's like, okay, here, take this Xanax or, take this medication, and there's no real conversation about what's going on. I mean, the biggest things that we're stressed out about is health, wealth, relationships, right? I mean, those are the three biggest things. So, if we had our doctors that were more in tuned, and maybe there is training that needs to go on as how to talk to patients about things going on in their relationships, things going on, in other areas of their lives, and how that is affecting your health. Because I know for me, I had the most health issues when I was in my toxic relationship, and those health issues went away once I was out of it. But it was those high levels of stress over long periods of time that was causing my body to start to break apart and fall apart and have like back issues, migraines, like I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. I mean, it was literally like there were so many different things going wrong with me. And here I am 14 years later, and I don't have any of those problems. And it really just is amazing how much our physical body is affected by the stress and overwhelm of our relationships. And of course, our mental health, how much they're related to each other.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I believe that the body keeps the score. Mm-hmm. And if we're in a situation where we are stressed, then our cortisol levels are higher. You can think about it as 2 cups. So I'm trying to figure out how to do this. So let's say why not? Yeah. So you have a phone, and this is your genetic predisposition to this is your cup. You're going to start to have physical manifestations of stress once, this is like a cup, once fluid goes up the cup. Mm-hmm. This is your genetic predisposition. This is baseline. You only need this much amount of stress before you start having symptoms of high cortisol levels, and it starts to affect your body. Then because you have the higher genetic predisposition, all of a sudden you're having increased amounts of cortisol for prolonged periods of time. The cup itself is going to overflow from you not showing any signs of physical symptoms to all of a sudden showing significant amounts of physical symptoms. But not everybody will show symptoms when they're under a lot of stress, because some people just have less of a genetic predisposition to do that. And stress is not, it's not good for us. And sometimes we don't even know what it's like to be outside of that unhealthy relationship until we're out of it.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, well, how does you have a certain amount of stress right now. Let's say that the stress decreased, you had less cortisol in your body. How would that affect things? And you'll know until you're not in that situation, until you don't have the amount of cortisol in your
Well,
system.
and I think we're so like there's the predisposition, and you just get used to that level of stress. And I think for a lot of us who were in that toxicity, like whether it was you were used to it from your childhood, so that just feels normal, or it's slowly built up over time, and you're now this place you're like, how did I get here? You look back and you're like, I would have never accepted this, however many years ago, but here I am, and I feel terrible.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think, like when I work with clients, we're so, like, you talk about nutrition. I mean, we make everyone drink, this is my green smoothie, I drink this, I follow it, I have my water, I make sure I get my exercise in. I mean, all of those things, because life happens and there's stress there anyway. But then you throw in on top of it also having your romantic partner causing you that extra level of stress. And it's just, there's so many things that could go wrong because you're used to dealing with it. We go into this way like, I can take care of myself, let me take care of this other person, and we focus on the other person's needs, and our needs get put on the back burner.
Absolutely. We all live life in a state of stress. Ideally, our romantic relationship is one that helps with the stress level.
Mm-hmm.
So just like I said, when you have high amounts of stress, it's harder for you to get higher amounts of oxytocin and vasopressin in your body. You just get to have lower levels. Certain behavior that you do with your romantic partner is supposed to increase those oxytocin and vasopressin levels, and is supposed to help you feel more calm.
Mm-hmm.
Higher levels of oxytocin are supposed to make you feel safe and secure and good, even under periods of stress. But to have those higher levels of oxytocin in a relationship, you need to be in a healthy relationship, because the behaviors that promote higher levels of oxytocin in your body are nurturing behaviors. When your partner nurtures you, you nurture them. Physical touch, when you spend a lot of time holding hands, cuddling, things like that, those also increase your oxytocin levels. Those kinds of things make decrease your stress. They decrease your cortisol. Doing exercise with them, doing things that are promoting of a healthy relationship. When you are in a toxic relationship, you don't get those same surges. Your partner isn't helping you as much to get your oxytocin level to go up, just because they don't tend to be as nurturing.
Yeah. And or they're nurturing, and then they take it away and they do something terrible, and then they'll give you a little. It's like, it's the breadcrumbing, right? They give that little bit, and that's what we get. We want that. We'll hold on to those breadcrumbs as much as we can. So we're getting closer to, like, we're getting short on time already, which is, it's amazing how quickly it goes. For everyone who's just tuning in, this is Kicking Healthy Relationships with the Curb. This is Stephanie McPhail. We are here with author Ivana Lucas. And, we're talking about toxic relationships, and we're talking about it from really the chemical, from the physician's perspective. And, I think it's so interesting when you look at the hormones and all the things that are affected. So it's not just, it's not just a relationship. There's actually, your body has a chemical reaction to these types of relationships, and it's good to be aware of what it is, so that, maybe even when you're thinking about leaving or what's going on, like knowing what's happening to your body, I think is really important. So I know you've written some books. Can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Thank you. So I've written a couple books about relationships. So one of them is about heartbreak. And I like that one because sometimes when we're going through a heartbreak ourselves, it's a really painful process. It's not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And we might think, oh, it's going to last for a long time. This is not normal. This was the love of my life. Life will never be the same. Really, like, it's hard. Mm-hmm. My book provides some cognitive behavioral therapy, is probably the best way to describe it. I go into, if you're having a broken heart, if you're feeling actual heart pain because of your breakup, that's normal. It has to do with cortisol release. Huge changes in hormonal levels from when the relationship ended to when you were in a relationship until now. Mm-hmm. And that changes things. It makes you feel a certain way. Make you feel all over the place. I also talk about things like, maybe this wasn't the best relationship for you. Maybe everything that you imagined, like that picket fence and that house and the babies and the dog, maybe that's not how it was going to turn out with that person. Maybe it was going to turn out some way differently. And I also give you hope that sometimes in order to find the right person for you, it's like a numbers game. You have to keep looking and looking, and you have to put yourself out there. So there's many chapters in that book that kind of like help you think about things a little bit differently. And I'm hoping by the end of it, you look at yourself and the relationship and the breakup and say, you know what I'm experiencing is normal. It's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to allow myself to feel these emotions, because if I bottle them all up, I might get sick with something. So I'm supposed to feel these emotions. And maybe actually what happened is the best thing that happened for me. And so I'm hoping that you have that. Sometimes you can't change the situation, but you can change your beliefs about it. Mm-hmm. And by changing your beliefs, you come out in a different place.
I love that.
And then my other book is about people who find themselves, like, we live in a modern world, and because we live in the modern world, we wind up in different kinds of relationships. And not every relationship is black and white. Like, as people get older and some people divorce, they wind up with relationships afterwards that are different than what the kind of relationships they had when they were in their teenagers and when they were in their 20s, just because now people come with families or with history. Or sometimes people have open relationships, or people continues to stay married, but now they have relationships with other people while within that marriage. And it's not something that's discussed as much. And I think there needs to be some conversations, because I'm seeing in more of my patients that this is what's happening. And we need to have those conversations. And then we also need to talk about what those relationships may feel like for everyone who's involved.
That's wonderful. So we got about a minute left. How can people get a hold of you? How can they find all these great books? How can they be a part of your world?
Thank you. So go on Ivana Lucas, go on Amazon. My books are there. There'll soon be audiobooks as well. And you can find my website from there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. Any final thought before we say goodbye?
Just, you're normal. And it's okay. And life is crazy. And the goal is just to be able to better understand yourself. And I'm hoping to do that.
I love it. Well, thank you so much again for coming and hanging out with us. Too bad we never got to see Steve. He's still probably trying to find a place for internet. So Steve, we did miss you, but it was great chatting with Ivana Lucas. And please come next week. We actually have a great guest that we'll be talking about addiction. So see you next episode. Bye, everybody.